ANWEN stumbled and slid down the good-sized slope she'd been trying to navigate. She somehow lost all track of time as she lay there, staring heavenward as a sudden bout of laughter filled her. She rocked back and forth where she lay, arms hugging her torso. Fallen leaves and dirt caught in her hair and clothes. The strange taste of the sap lingered on her tongue as the giggles erupted from deep within her belly. Lifting both hands above her face, she stared at the pale skin that covered them. Dark branches stood out against the morning sky overhead, still drenched in only starlight. The shapes of the branches blurred at the edges. They were replaced with the outlines of stone buildings hewn from the mountain ranges. ANWEN shook her head and the giggles subsided. The world seemed to spin around her. It almost felt like she was floating above the ground. The earth felt as though it slid underneath her.
Deep within these walls they sleep.
A voice seemed to whisper as the view blurred once more. As the sky began to show the first tinges of sunrise, the mountain reared up in front of her. She felt as though she were standing looking at it instead of lying on the ground.
Only one may enter the keep.
The voice continued, echoing as if from far away now. Suddenly, ANWEN found herself back in her childhood home. She was in the nursery, where a dragon-filled mobile slowly spun over the crib. Inside the bed, a light-haired baby burbled, reaching for the wings and tails above her. It didn't seem to matter that she would never reach the fluttering fabric. Just reaching was enough. A young James Porter peered down at his daughter, eyes soft.
Someday, little one, you will fly with dragons.
His smile was warm, and filled with a love so profound it made ANWEN's breath hitch in her throat. Margot Porter entered the room, an apron around her hips. She carried a wet dish towel in one hand, which she used to wipe the excess water from her skin.
Aren't you supposed to be putting the baby to bed?
She admonished. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a messy bun. The wrinkles of time had smoothed from her face, making her look years younger than ANWEN was used to seeing. James turned to his wife.
Stories are an essential part of bedtime,
he reminded.
Besides, they're not just stories.
Margot's expression softened as she leaned against the doorframe.
She's too young to be able to remember those stories later,
she said. Mr. Porter shrugged.
Maybe not. Only time can tell that tale.
He gave the mobile a spin. The motion sent the miniature dragons dancing over the reaching child inside the crib. The scene shifted. James Porter sat at a drawing table, pencil in hand as he sketched out the rough silhouette of a mountain range. He looked a bit older than before. There were a few strands of gray mixed in with his darker hair. A few more wrinkles creased his face, but the same vitality remained in his eyes.
The city used to be here.
James placed a finger on the drawing. A 2-year-old ANWEN peered over the top of a kitchen chair, pulled close to the table.
Right between these 2 points. That's where our family used to live.
A look of awe crossed the young girl's face.
And the mountains?
She bounced up and down on the chair. Her little feet occasionally left the wooden surface each time her body rose from the surface. Her tiny fingers clung to the back of the chair for balance. James pulled out a fresh piece of paper and began drawing again. A sort of path curved around the paper, stopping at what became a straight line.
The gates,
he said, indicating the drawn wall.
Someday, one of us will go and unlock them.
From behind the pair, Margot entered the room. Her hair was pinned up on her head in a bun like the one from before, only more tidy. 1 or 2 wrinkles had formed around her eyes. A few silver hairs peeked through her crown of red shot brown hair. Despite this, they were hard to see without direct light shining on them. Without so much as announcing her presence, she walked over to her child. She bent to place her lips near her daughter's ear and whispered words in a strange tongue. She then kissed her daughter on the crown of her head and moved to take her husband's hand.
Kern wants us to keep those memories locked away,
she said as James looked at her, questions in his eyes.
Are we to stop telling her about her heritage as well?
He asked. A line of disapproval creased his brow.
Is she not to know her duty as one of our family? Can we not tell her anything at all?
Margot nodded solemnly.
It's for her protection,
she assured.
She must not know who she is or what she can become until the time is right.
ANWEN gasped like a fish out of water, the scene muddying around her. Were there other things Kern had not wanted her to remember from her clouded past? But why were they coming to light now? And protect her from what? From others learning who she was? She supposed that was possible. All the craziness hadn't started until she'd come across Tyler. Tyler, who had somehow known what she really was even when she hadn't. But that wasn't quite right either. because her father had been murdered in cold blood when she was still just a child. Kern had protected her from the same fate, hiding her from her father's killer. It wasn't until she strived to fulfill his dying wish that things had started to come to light. Wind seemed to howl around her, whipping dust every which way.
Find the heart and speak the word.
The same voice from before intoned into the darkness. It spoke with an authority that could not be denied.
Only then will your voice be heard.
The dust began to take form, light flickering like an old film reel. Spinning at the end of its run, the mountain loomed overhead. The gates stood wide open to receive her, almost as if someone had hit fast forward on a movie. Everything sped up. ANWEN found herself rushing through various passageways at breakneck speed. She felt like she was riding a roller coaster. Up, down, and around she sped. Finally, the dizzying pace subsided. She found herself in the large gallery she'd seen only in dreams. The living crystal at the center pulsed like a beating heart, just as it had when she'd seen the master key made. But instead of the massive space being empty, row upon row of various dragons stood as if frozen in stone. Moments after she recognized what she was seeing, she was moving backward. At the same pace as before, she found herself retracing the breakneck ride in reverse. Once outside, the massive stone doors closed in front of her. ANWEN felt breathless as she stood outside the gates. Slowly, she turned from the barred doors and started down the path back to the ruined city. Firelight greeted her as she reached the courtyard below. The ruined amphitheater remained empty, despite the flicker of flames from beyond. Tents were set up like a small city in the main square, with some of the old structures used as temporary housing. There were more tumbled buildings than before. They opened up the secondary courtyard to the main one. ANWEN realized the buildings that had hidden the amphitheater from view were completely destroyed. Only rock and dust remained. A tent, far larger than the others, sat near the dry fountain in the secondary courtyard. Several fallen stood guard at the tent's flap. ANWEN drew back into the shadows, but they didn't seem to notice her. The sound of muffled talking came from inside the canvas walls, but she couldn't tell what was being said. Part of her wanted to move closer to hear what was going on. Another part told her to stay back. From the ancient path, a small group of people marched forward. No one challenged them as they passed into the tent city. A few even joined them as they headed towards the main tent where ANWEN stood. They stopped just outside the entrance, oblivious of their silent observer. The tent flap was suddenly thrown open. ANWEN took a few quick steps back into deeper shadow as Madame Millard strode out.
Ah,
the Master Mage said. Smiling, she held out her arms in welcome to the hooded newcomer standing in the midst of the small group.
Kira, thank you for returning under such short notice. I would not have called you had our need not been great.
The overweight woman ushered the group inside the canvas confines. She dropped the flap once all were inside. Everything swam in ANWEN's vision, like someone had swirled their hand in a once clear puddle. When her vision cleared, she was staring up at a sky full of stars. Light was creeping across the sky, turning midnight blues to a lighter shade. The trees framed the opening to the sky. ANWEN felt as if every fiber of her being was vibrating. She closed her eyes. She still felt like she was floating above the ground. Despite this, she could feel every grain of dirt pressing against her skin. For the briefest moments, she wondered if she'd gone mad.